Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing a review for The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. So this is an adult high fantasy that is also a standalone, and it's a retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear. So this story takes place on the island of Innis Lear, and Innis Lear itself has its own kind of consciousness and this wild magic to it, but the king of Innis Lear, so King Lear, has kind of turned his back on the island and turned his back on the magic of the island and this magic that sustains it and its people, because after the death of his wife, the queen, he's kind of slowly descending into madness. And the story takes place years after his wife has died. But at this point, his daughters are now adults, but he still has not named an heir. So the story is following all of these characters who are all kind of major players within the country of Innis Lear and from other countries who are watching to see what's going to happen and whether this country is going to crumble or whether someone's going to be able to save it. Because by not naming an heir and by turning his back on this like sustaining magic of the island, King Lear has really made the island and the whole country extremely vulnerable. And we are following, as I said, the three daughters, and so the oldest two daughters are both very ambitious, and they're kind of just waiting for the king to die so that they can take control of the island. And then the younger daughter is not as ambitious, but she's kind of the favorite of the king, and she really wants to just take care of her father because she actually very much loves her father. Before diving into the rest of the review, I do want to put some content warnings on this, specifically for suicide, animal sacrifice, because there's kind of a gross animal sacrifice scene in this, but especially a warning for miscarriage and infertility, because that is a major storyline for one of the main characters in this, that it is just a theme throughout the book. And also there are some very intense scenes where we are with a character while she is going through a miscarriage. But starting off with the setting. The setting of this book is so important because the island, as I said, has its own consciousness. It has a personality, and the island has favorite people. It can communicate with people, and it has its opinions about who the island thinks should be king. And I loved that this island has nature magic. This whole story has fabulous nature magic in it. There are kind of three parts to the magic in this world. One is the root waters, which are kind of these underground rivers that flow throughout the island, and they're sort of like, they're treated like the blood of the island. There is the language of trees, so people can actually speak to the trees and communicate with the island itself. And then there are star prophecies, so people reading the stars for various prophecies of the future. And I loved all of the nature magic that was in this. I love that people can speak to trees and communicate with the island, and the nature magic just adds this element of richness to the setting. The setting just feels so alive and atmospheric and vivid. And of course the writing also really lends itself to the atmosphere and vividness of this setting. I think this book is just beautifully written. I loved the writing style. It is very poetically written, which I know may not be for everybody, and sometimes it could be a little bit dense in the writing style, but it is just absolutely beautifully crafted. Plot-wise, this also is kind of a slower moving plot. It's really focusing on these small political maneuverings of all of these different characters and countries as everyone's trying to figure out what's going to happen with the succession of the island, and if someone is going to invade and all of these things. So it's these very small political maneuverings, and it really focuses a lot on these characters and their relationships and their own personal journeys, which again may not be for everybody, but personally I loved it. I think that the focus on character was so important for this story, and as a character-driven reader, I loved that focus on the characters. This is multi-perspective. We're following actually a lot of different perspectives, but not a ton of storylines. So we get to see just a few storylines from multiple perspectives, which I actually really liked. I like seeing how different characters are viewing and reacting to different situations, and I think that having so many different character perspectives, because I mean, I can think of at least 8 different perspectives off the top of my head, and there are probably more than that, but Even so, it didn't feel confusing or overwhelming because there weren't too many plot lines that we were following. We also get some flashbacks in this that give further context to these characters and their relationships because, of course, the sisters have all grown up together, and then also there are a lot of people that are, you know, family, childhood friends that they have known for so long who are also major players in this whole political situation. And so these flashbacks are really important to give context to the relationships that they have now, kind of who these characters have become, what are their dynamics now as adults. Also, the three main characters in this, the three sisters, are all biracial women of color, and there are also other side characters who are people of color. One of the sisters, I think, is aromantic and asexual. Those terms are never specifically used in this, but she's very much written that way. And then there are also a lot of other side characters who it's hinted at that they may be queer, although it is never really explicitly shown or stated in the story. And I do kind of wish that that had been more clearly part of the characters or the story. I did find that there was a little part in the middle where it kind of dragged for me. The first half of the book is a lot of setup, which I really enjoyed reading, but there was a little section at the beginning of the second half where I felt like the story kind of stalled because everyone was sort of in their positions and then was sort of waiting. But then after that, everything kind of comes crashing back together, and in comparison to how slow everything had been going before, it feels almost like a whirlwind that everything kind of starts happening. But I think the strength of this book is really its characters. As much as I love the setting and the writing and just everything, the characters are really what make this book something that I absolutely loved. The characters in this all feel so real and so raw, and they're all just, they're very messy and they're so conflicted and frustrating, but also beautiful. I just loved the way that they were written. They're all such complicated people and they feel like real people with how complicated they are. And most of them, if not all, are very morally gray people. There are very few, if any, characters that you can just go like, oh, you're a good person, just, you know, a good one that I can just like completely with no reservations. They're all just very complicated and morally gray, but I feel like what she does so well is really making you understand these characters and you really understand who they are and where they're coming from, so that even when they are making bad decisions or doing terrible things, you still understand them so much. And for me, that just made me care about them so much. So even when they were being terrible people, like, I still sympathized with them. I still cared about them so much. And these characters are ones that I'm still thinking about weeks after I finished reading this book. I'm still thinking about these characters. And as I said, one of the things that I really liked about this is that it puts the focus of the story and the sympathy of the story on the sisters instead of on King Lear. And I think that just makes a huge difference in how the story is told and how much I, at least, was able to connect with the story and empathize with it. And I think that she just does a beautiful job of really fleshing out these characters and making you understand them, as I said. Especially the older two sisters, I think that in the original play, I always felt like they were kind of flat characters and they were just sort of very easily vilified. But I think that she just does such an amazing job of really fleshing them out and making them fuller and making you really understand them and be able to empathize with them. And I just loved the older two sisters, even though they were awful. And I loved their dynamic, that the two of them especially have such a close bond and they are so fiercely supportive of each other. And I loved their dynamic. There are some romantic relationships or romantic plots in this, but they're really not the focus of the story, which is something I really liked also. I like it when there's a romance in a story, or at least some like romantic interest or something, but I really loved that the focus of the story was really on family and ambition and responsibility and growth. I think that the concept of growth for these characters was really interesting because not all of the characters in this book grew. Some of them did and had really interesting arcs, but other ones didn't. And sometimes it was because they refused to grow. And I just thought the kind of theme of growth and being willing to grow and willing to change, and how that makes you a stronger, better person, and like the willingness and ability to look outside of yourself and your own desires. It just was so interesting. But as I said, the characters in this are really what made the book for me, and I just loved them so much. And it just made this a very like emotional read for me. There were times where I was reading this that I was just like making noises, like incoherent noises, because I could not handle what was happening, and I was just like very emotional about what was going on. But also, as I said, it's one that I kept thinking about for weeks after I finished reading it, and the more I think about it, the more I love it, and the more I just think it was just so beautiful and brilliant. And I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really loved this book. So that is all for my review of The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!